Other than Antonio Brown, Julio Jones has without a doubt been the best receiver of the last decade. There's only ever been 6 players in NFL history to have 300 yards receiving in one game, and Julio Jones is one of them. And since he'll now be joining a Tennessee Titans offense that already has Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry, and A.J. Brown, I think it's now best to go back and see just how he got to this point. Born and raised in Foley, Alabama, Jones would attend Foley High School where he would be a triple sport athlete playing football, basketball, and track. He gained notoriety very quickly, being a 3-year varsity player and catching 75 passes for over 1,300 yards and 16 touchdowns in his junior year. Outside of football, he'd be named Gatorade Track and Field Athlete of the Year while also winning the title of Mr. Alabama in track his junior year. Being a 5-star recruit while helping lead Foley to a 13-1 record, Jones will be the number 1 ranked wide receiver in the country in his class of 2008. From there, he decided to commit to Alabama, where he joined a team who had just gone 7-6 the year before and now looking to make a jump in the second year under head coach Nick Saban. Jones' impact will immediately be felt in the 3 years that he was there, being a first true freshman wide receiver to ever start in a season opener for Alabama. He would also have a touchdown catch in a 34-10 win versus Clemson to open the year. In his freshman year, where Alabama would finish 12-2, Jones would have 58 catches, 924 yards, and 4 touchdowns. This was good enough for him to be SEC Freshman of the Year. He was already drawing comparisons to the likes of Michael Irvin and Larry Fitzgerald. Scouts already liked how he was a unique and rare prospect with a good blend of size, strength, and athleticism. After a down sophomore year, Jones would help Alabama go 10-3 with a bowl win over Michigan State while having 78 catches, over 1,100 yards, and 7 touchdowns while also having 2 rushing touchdowns as well. Ending his college career at second in school history in yards and catches while being 4th in touchdowns, Jones would decide to forego his senior season and declare for the NFL draft. Jones will be joining his teammates Greg McElroy, Marcel Darius, and Heisman winner Mark Ingram in looking to make the NFL jump. As a top receiver right behind A.J. Green, scouts liked his release off the line, his strength, his deep threat and blocking ability, but some actually felt that his route running and speed could have been better even though he ran a 4.39 at the combine while dealing with injuries, a broken bone in his foot to be exact. Projected as an early first-round pick, Jones would get his name called with the 6th overall pick in the 2011 draft held by the Atlanta Falcons. After trading 5 draft picks to the Cleveland Browns, 2 of those guys turning into Greg Little and Brandon Whedon, more Browns busts, the Falcons would now have their guy in Julio Jones. He'd be just one of 5 Crimson Tide's players taken this year. Julio Jones was joining an Atlanta Falcons team that had just gone 13-3 the year before under their young quarterback Matt Ryan and 3rd-year head coach Mike Smith. His debut would come against the Chicago Bears, where he'd have 5 catches for 71 yards in a 30-12 loss. By week 4, he'd already showed the NFL that he had what it took to be a number 1 receiver with 11 catches for 127 yards in a 30-28 win over the Seattle Seahawks. Jones would finish his rookie year with 54 catches for 959 yards, leading all rookies. The Falcons would go 10-6 to make the playoffs, but would lose 24-2 to the eventual Super Bowl champion New York Giants. Jones would have 7 catches for 64 yards in his first playoff game. The Julio Jones and Matt Ryan connection would just continue to evolve. He'd start off year 2 with 6 catches for 108 yards and 2 touchdowns with the Falcons hanging 40 on the Kansas City Chiefs. There was no such thing as a sophomore slump year. Julio Jones just continued to get better. Having 4 games with 100 yards receiving, he would finish his 2012 season with 79 catches for just under 1,200 yards and 10 touchdown catches, a number which is still the most he's had in his career while never having more than 8 touchdowns since. The Falcons as a team would finish 13-3, while later having a nice win over the Seattle Seahawks in the divisional round. Atlanta was so close to a Super Bowl, but a 28-24 loss to the 49ers, where Jones would have 11 catches for 182 yards and 2 touchdowns, would end their season. As a result of Julio taking the next step, he would make the Pro Bowl for the first time in his career, alongside fellow wide receiver Roddy White, with Matt Ryan also in the Pro Bowl as well. These 2 wide receivers were the Falcons' first 1,000-yard receiving pair since 1998. Tony Martin and Terrence Mathis were the last to do it. Julio Jones had put the entire league on notice early on in his career. Unfortunately for him, injuries began to hit him. The 2013 season was an all-around down year for the Atlanta Falcons. Dealing with injuries all throughout, Julio would only play in 5 games, but would still have 41 catches for 580 yards and 2 touchdowns, so he was literally averaging 9 catches for over 100 yards each game. The Falcons took a gigantic step backwards with a 4-12 record and had head coach Mike Smith began to be on the hot seat. Atlanta would of course pick up the 5th-year option of Julio Jones' rookie contract following the year. Well deserved and no surprise here. And by this time, Roddy White would now be 33 years old and in the twilight of his career. Jones would open up his 4th year with big games, 116 yards in Week 1 versus the Saints, and later 11 catches for 161 yards and 2 touchdowns in a 56-14 win over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He would have 7 games with at least 100 yards and even have a 259-yard performance, but his touchdown count would be unusually low. Jones accumulated 104 catches for over 1,500 yards and 6 touchdowns, earning him his 2nd Pro Bowl selection. The Falcons as a team, however, weren't much different compared to last year. Atlanta would go 6-10 and Mike Smith's time as head coach would officially be over. Julio would get a new 5-year, $71.5 million extension, while Dan Quinn would now come in as the new head coach of the Falcons. 2015 would prove to be the absolute best the NFL has seen from Julio Jones. He'd set career highs while also leading the NFL with 136 catches for 1,871 yards and 8 touchdowns. The catches tied with Antonio Brown for most in the league, while the yard mark was only 2nd in NFL history behind Calvin Johnson's season in 2012. Atlanta showed some improvement with an 8-8 record, while Jones was once again a Pro Bowler while also being an All-Pro. The 2016 season up until a point was probably the most fun I've ever had being a Falcons fan. The now 27-year-old receiver had 7 100-yard receiving games and while even missed 2 games during the time. Early in the season, Julio Jones would have 12 catches for 300 yards and a touchdown in a 48-33 win over the Carolina Panthers. Having the number 1 ranked offense while having MVP Matt Ryan lead an 11-5 team, Jones would finish with 83 catches for 1,400 yards and 6 touchdowns. Jones continued to show that he could raise his level of play in the playoffs by having 15 catches for 247 yards and 3 touchdowns between 2 games. The Falcons were able to get a good win versus the Seahawks, but a 44-21 win over the Green Bay Packers is what really surprised and impressed me as well. Like these guys were really about to play Tom Brady and the New England Patriots after all of this. In a devastating defeat that was Super Bowl 51, where the Falcons blew a 28-3 lead that just made a joke out of the entire city, Julio Jones would still have 4 catches for 87 yards, not bad at all. The Atlanta Falcons as a team never really recovered from that blown lead either. The one consistent factor that they have would still be Jones, however. Despite Matt Ryan having a significant drop-off from the year before, partly due to losing offensive coordinator Kyle Shanahan to the 49ers, Julio Jones would have at least 1,400 yards for the 4th year in a row, along with 88 catches and just only 3 touchdowns. Getting him the ball when in red zone proved to be a major issue throughout the season. With all this going on, the Falcons would still finish 10-6 while being 3rd in the NFC East with a top 10 defense on the other side of the football, making it to just to the divisional round this time, where Jones would have 101 yards but would miss a crucial game-winning touchdown. The Falcons would still lose 15-10 to the Philadelphia Eagles, who would go on to beat Brady in the Super Bowl, something that Atlanta couldn't do. The Falcons would then open up the 2018 season, losing once more to the Eagles, but they still, like pretty much the rest of the NFL, had no answer for Julio Jones. He'd become the first player in Falcons history to have 40 games with at least 100 yards receiving. Later on in the season, Julio became the fastest player in NFL history to reach 10,000 yards receiving, surpassing Calvin Johnson, who did it in 115 games. Another great feat accomplished in a loss to the Cleveland Browns. Altogether, despite the Falcons finishing 7-9, Julio would become the first player in NFL history to record 5 straight 1,400-yard seasons, earning him his 6th Pro Bowl selection. And with Calvin Ridley now coming along as well, the Falcons had a nice receiving pair for the future. Just before the 2019 season, Jones would become the highest paid wide receiver in NFL history. A 3-year, $66 million contract extension was of course unheard of even for pass catchers in this day and age. By week 4 of the 2019 season, Jones would of course become the fastest player in NFL history to reach 11,000 yards receiving by passing Calvin Johnson in 115 games when he took 127 games. He would then finish off the year beating out Jerry Rice as the fastest player in NFL history to reach 12,000 yards receiving, doing so in 125 games while Rice did it in 142. Now, I'm not saying that it's guaranteed that Julio will reach 20,000 yards, but it's still very impressive to see someone beat Rice in something. Jones will wind up finishing second in yards and sixth in catches, even though he had 99 receptions. His past 2020 season was once again an all-around disappointment for the Falcons. Watching them play is pretty much a letdown and a waste of time in my opinion. With them blowing leads left and right, Dan Quinn would be fired after an 0-5 start where Raheem Morris was there to take his place. Julio Jones will play in the least number of games he's played in a season since 2013 while only appearing in 9 games in 2020. In an injury-plagued season for Jones where Calvin Ridley would instead be the go-to target for Matt Ryan, Julio would only have 51 catches for 771 yards and 3 touchdowns in his age 31 season. So he could have easily had another 1,000-yard season even if he just played a few more games. And after the Falcons finished with a 4-12 record, rumors would later come up in the offseason following about moving on from Julio Jones. It was made even more clear after Shannon Sharper called him live and had him on speaker saying that his time in Atlanta would be over. Some believe he wanted to go to the Cowboys, while Jones would actually say that he wanted to be on a contender, so the Cowboys would be out. Not long after that, Jones would get his wish by being traded to the Tennessee Titans in exchange for a future 2nd and 4th round pick. Julio Jones has been the best and most consistent receiver of his generation. It's disappointing that he couldn't get the Super Bowl win over the Patriots, and although I've enjoyed watching him with the Falcons, I'm excited to see what he'll do with the Titans. Thank you for watching the video. If you like the video, like and comment how you think Julio Jones and the Tennessee Titans will do in 2021, and if you think they can win a Super Bowl. And if you like me, subscribe.